So on elevation training today, we're going to talk about the things that you need to organize and look at for your end of financial year. So I've only got a very short list of 3 things, but they're multi-part. There's always multi-part in my language. So the first thing to look at is to review your asset list. So what does this actually mean? If you're using Xero, then you might have a depreciation schedule in which you've got a list of all of the assets that your business owns and how they're being depreciated, whether they've already been fully depreciated or whether they're getting a little bit of depreciation every single year. What you need to do with this asset list is, first of all, make sure that everything you own is on the list. So is there anything that you've bought in the last year that needs to be added in? And if it is, go find where it's hiding in Xero and make sure that it's coded to an asset code. So depending on your business, you might have an office and equipment asset code, or you might have a motor vehicles asset code, or you might have a plant and equipment asset code, you might have a buildings asset code. So all of these are deemed to be assets, and making sure that if you buy anything, it's coded to the asset code so that we can make sure it's included on your depreciation list and depreciated accordingly. The second part is to make sure that if you've sold any assets or if any have been destroyed for whatever reason, is to make sure you notify and let us know that they're no longer part of your assets. So if you've sold an asset, then how much did you receive for it? And code it back to that same asset account code of where it was initially stored. So as an example, you've got a motor vehicle, you've sold that motor vehicle, whatever proceeds you received for them, put it back to that motor vehicle asset account. Now that will help us identify that that's the one that's sold. There is another alternative. There's always alternatives with bookkeeping, and that is to have a separate income account on your profit and loss called sale of assets. And if you sell everything and put the proceeds to the sale of assets code, that can be the other place where you code it. So I don't care either way, so long as you're consistent all the way through. Either put the proceeds to the asset that you sold or put the proceeds to a sale of assets income account. So that's with your asset list. So make sure everything you own is on the list. Make sure everything you've sold or you've destroyed is notified so that we can take it off your list. Then we've got the next step for your end of financial year prep is to make sure your bank balances are correct. Now, when we're looking at bank reconciliations, especially with bank feeds, we assume that because the bank feeds are coming straight through from the bank, everything's there, everything's sorted, everything should work. But that's not always the case. Every now and then something goes wrong, and what's coming through on your bank feeds doesn't always match up with what's on your bank statements. So now is a really good time of year, middle of June, to look at your bank statements and make sure that your bank statements match the balances in your Xero or in your web file. Then once your bank balances are correct, then we can know that, hey, 20 days out from the end of financial year, it's most likely still going to be right. And so when it comes to sending those bank statements through to the accountant to make sure that they have checked your data, you already know that it's right. They're not going to come back and say, hey, this is wrong. Awesome. Then the third thing I wanted to talk about with end of financial year prep is making sure that your accounts receivable and your accounts payable amounts are correct. So the accounts receivable are the invoices that you've sent out to other people. So it's the money that you haven't been paid yet for, paid yet. Those words didn't come out right. So your accounts receivable, checking the reports, so checking your receivables reconciliation report, checking your aged receivables report, make sure that everybody who is on that list is still going to pay you. So as an accountant, I get the ugh when I see an invoice sitting on the system that's 3 or 4 years old. Are they going to pay you? If they're not going to pay you, then we can do an adjustment and take them off that list. So it's not going to sit there as being something that we see over and over again. If it's only less than a year old, start sending statements out. Ask for the money. If you've done the work, ask for the money. But if it's an old one, write it off, get it off the list so that you know that it's unlikely to get that money. You're not going to get it, so move on. On the flip side, the accounts payable report. So you might see this as a creditors report or an aged payables report. What you want to see there is that those bills on that list are the only bills that are still outstanding. So yet again, another thing that makes me cringe as an accountant is seeing bills for something that has already been paid as a direct debit, or something that's only got 2 cents left over because you didn't pay them the right amount, and so it's still sitting there as outstanding. So have a look through that accounts payable list, see what is still current, what's still owing, and make amends, make do to try and get rid of the rest of those ones that are not still owing, that are incorrect, where they have been double entered. Go back and find that original payment that you've recorded and match it back against the bill so that you can have a correct list of what's still outstanding. So having your accounts receivables and your accounts payables incorrect can result in you paying more tax than what you need to. So we don't want to have that. Awesome. So that was my 3 tips for end of financial year prep. So checking your asset list, making sure your bank balances are right, and then checking your accounts receivable and accounts payables. Any other questions, or do you have any tips that you want to share?
I'd like to make sure that if you have payroll, make sure that you have your super and everything up to date, and that your wages payable account is reconciled.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we will be doing payroll in the next couple of weeks as well as end of financial year comes up. So good tips. Thank you. Brilliant. Okie dokie. So I'm going to stop the recording there. And if you do have any questions about end of financial year prep and what you need to do now that you've identified some of these things, then please jump into any of the calls later on and we can step you through the how-tos.